Joe Pane, welcome to my podcast. How are you?
I'm really well, Jake. Thanks so much for having me, and it's an honor to be one of your early podcast interviews.
Yeah, thank you. It's you can sit in procrastination purgatory for so long with things that sometimes you've got to go, okay, I've got to get 10 names down. What comes to me right now? I need to be able to message them with, an instant messenger rather than like a cold email. Boom, get 10 in the diary and get up and running. So here we are, which is really, really cool. Joe, we've become friends over the last maybe year or two, and I'd love to kind of dive into why that was and what brings us to that friendship. But before we get there, for those people that have never heard of you before, I'd love to dive through how you became you, essentially. And to start with, I've heard on another podcast talk about being in the real estate industry and just getting frustrated with life. And then you ended up, I just want to talk about this idea of like backing yourself. And you went alone and you now very much are steering your own ship and have been for some time. So I'd love to learn about why you got yourself into that position and how it's been.
Yeah, so my background's in psychology, sociology, and essentially what happened was I invested those 4 years at uni, which was great, and then I was fortunate enough back in 1995 to actually get a job, or 1994 to get a job which was related to my degree, because back in Melbourne, back in the 90s, it was challenging to find a job that was in connection to your degree qualification. And I was just fortunate enough to land a job at Ford Motor Company as a rehabilitation counsellor. And I was there for a couple of years. It was I entered that job very green, very innocent, very ignorant. I had no idea that politics existed. I had no idea that secondary and tertiary agendas existed. I had no idea of the complexities of what this role was. And the role was essentially about getting people back to work who had physical injuries. I was given a caseload in excess, more than half of my caseload were malingerers, so they were just trying to take advantage of the system. I had to deal with shop stewards, on-site insurance company, medical centre, area manager, and a worker trying to navigate their way through this. 20 or 30% of the time I was dealing with someone genuine. All the rest of it was just awful, and I absolutely hated it. So after 2 years, I stayed there for 2 years because if you can picture this, 94, 24 years old, I was on a package of about 48 grand a year, which for 1994 and a 24-year-old was huge. And the money kept me there for 2 years. And it just shows the short-term motivation of money. If the only motivation you have in life is money, then and nothing else, it doesn't seem to be a long-term strategy. So what happened was I got lost, and I was desperate to leave, but I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I couldn't just leave. I didn't want to leave and just not be employed. I'm not wired that way. So I wanted to build a bridge to something else, and a colleague of mine who was working with me at the time at Ford Motor Company, he was a fellow rehabilitation counsellor. He was just looking after a different part of the manufacturing plant that I was. He had just sold his house, and he was rabbiting on about how phenomenal this agent was that he had worked with. And long and the short of it is I met this agent, and then he introduced me to the training coaching company that he went to. And they, in turn, introduced me to a local office that used this particular philosophy, a bit of an ironical philosophy of ethics in real estate, which for a lot of people is like a bit of oxymoronic term, but it was actually true. And this particular company was a father and son business. And I worked in real estate for 7 years at the end. It was a incredible growth period because the first, 12 to 15 months, I was actually door knocking on the streets cold to build my database. Never done anything like that in my life. And that certainly accelerated my growth and certainly boosted my own personal relationship with uncertainty, big time, in a good way. Built that database, got the leads. And as I said, I stayed there for 7 years. Now, 5 of those 7 years were great. The last 2 years, I started becoming disengaged with the repetitious nature of the role. And there was no other opportunity there. There was no profit share opportunity. There was no growth opportunity. So I reverted back to my psychology, sociology background. And what happened was there was an advertisement I saw in some magazine I was reading about how you can have your own personal development business and professional development business. And long and the short of it is I went and did a diploma in that space. And next month, as of the time of the recording of this in early 2025, in February of 2025, in just a few weeks, I'll be celebrating my 19th year in business. So
well done.
In the coaching and training space. So I'm a human behavioralist specializing in emotional fitness. And I'm also a Bitcoiner, Jake, and I love it.
Well, and they intertwine in an extraordinary way. And we'll cover this, I'm sure, Joe. So really simple. Psychology. Why were you interested in psychology?
So I've always loved people. I've always been fascinated by the human condition. I've always been fascinated by, what drives people, fascinated by personality, fascinated by how people construct their lives, destroy their lives, create their lives. I've just always been fascinated by that. And also I've always had a healthy fascination in the realm of relationship. That seemed to have been something I was sort of naturally good at, is connecting with people. And I just wanted to learn something more substantial than just my intuition around people. So it drew me to that space. And then that's what eventually led to me starting my own business, specializing, as I say, in group trainings and speaking at different events around the specific topic of emotional fitness.
And you mentioned there, like, intuition. Intuition's obviously crucial and in many ways guides a huge amount of our decision making. But like, A, what is intuition? B, how do you know to read it or to trust it? And C, it's like, when you started peeling back the layers of what you actually went to go and study, there was data to actually back it up. Is that right? When you started digging into the science behind this stuff?
Yeah. So ironically, all the work I do these days is actually quite removed from my psychology degree and based more on frameworks and thought systems that I've created under the influence and inspiration of people like Carl Jung, who in the human behavioral space existed 100 years ago. The whole transpersonal psychoanalytic sort of space, humanistic psychology, massive fan of that, influenced these frameworks that I've put together based on my own experiences. So intuition is really, look, you ask, 10 different people what intuition is and you'll get 10 different versions of it, which is understandable because intuition is quite complex. Essentially what it is, it's a culmination of all I'll use the word data, although I'm not sort of a data person, but it's a collected accumulation of all of your experiences, everything you've read, everything you've experienced, every conversation that you've had, that it just culminates in the unconscious mind. So intuition comes from the unconscious. And the unconscious means, of course, that it exists outside of our awareness. One of the philosophies is the intuitive hits that, say, I get by looking at you and go, gee, let's pretend, Jake, we don't know each other and we've just met in a training session. And I look at you and I go, gee, I like this man. Why do you like this man? I don't know. I just do. I just connect with him. Well, why? I don't know. There's something, it's just an intuitive thing. So, but one chunk of theory is that what it is in that moment, in that sort of collapsed moment of a few seconds, I'm accessing all of the information from my unconscious mind of all of the reference points I've had around people that I've met that you remind me of, that culminates together in a nanosecond of I like you or I don't like you kind of thing, or I like this and I don't like that. That's one of the theories. And I tend to believe that that's a big part of it. The other part of it is also depending on the type of behavioral profile one has, can also open up the doors to intuition. And that's a whole other conversation that has got many, many layers to it. But and intuition also, we learn to trust it or not, depending on our experience with it. So if I go around meeting people and my intuition has proven to be wrong so many times, well, then my trust levels, obviously my intuition levels are going to drop significantly. But if on the other hand, like I was just saying, it's funny that you asked this question because I was just saying to my wife last night how I've learned, especially in being in my own business for the last couple of decades, I've learned to rely a lot on my intuition in terms of who to work with, who to not work with, where to go, where not to go, and all that kind of thing. So, but I think that's a combination of maturity and just being on I want to say on your own, running your own show for a couple of decades. I think does that.
So what I love, Joe, is as an investor, financial returns are the obvious metric that you're judging financial capital with. But you mentioned something called humanistic psychology. I really want to ask you what that means, because
Yeah.
more latterly, and what this podcast is going to be about, is that investing, you can invest in all sorts of different areas. It doesn't have to have a financial return. Humanistic investing for me is relationships and your wife or your kids or your network, and the pooled capital of goodwill that you have in that space is just as important as any financial investment you might make. And the third bucket that I like to talk about is then intellectual capital. So it's much more about your skill set and like, what do you know? So what is humanistic psychology? Because that's a word, humanistic specifically, that's come up for me a lot recently.
Yeah. The best way to explain humanistic psychology is if you think of one of the captains of humanistic psychology, Dr. Abraham Maslow. Now, a lot of us have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So understanding what drives us through the philosophy of a needs framework is a big part of humanistic psychology. So, for example, with Maslow, we won't go through the whole model, but the base of the model is, well, first of all, once you've got your basic survival needs met, you can then start focusing on other needs, the needs for connection, the needs for becoming part of a tribe or a network or a family. And then it gets all the way to the top, where the ultimate, after all these other needs are satisfied, the top need is the need of self-realization, however one defines it. So humanistic psychology is really a deep dive into understanding what drives you, what influences all of your decision-making, what influences what actions you will take or not take. It's to me, the reason why humanistic psychology to me is a big favorite is because it's where the rubber hits the road. It's the most practical I know of all of the psychologies. It's not racked with so much complex frameworks that are so removed from everyday life. Humanistic psychology can be applied to everyday life. So understanding human needs through the Maslow model, for example, really helps us all make a lot of sense of life that sometimes can be quite confusing.
And just on a very simple level, Joe, I think about, well, if I was looking at why someone might do something, this is where the Austrian School of Economics has been such a fascinating place for me to spend time the last couple of years. And that's really only happened because of coming across Bitcoin. But thinking about like, well, what is value? And okay, why is so much of the economics I've ever learned all about this kind of centralized entity doing X, Y, Z? What does the individual actually do? And this idea of like human action, it's very, very powerful. And so if someone is unable to feed themselves, then they're obviously going to operate at a very different level or frequency or consciousness, whatever you want to kind of describe it as.
That's right. And if we simplify this even more, Jake, it's like, you know, if anyone here listening to this, I'm sure everyone can relate to this, and that is that if you've ever been in incredible pain, whether it's because you've stubbed your toe really hard against a table and you're in whatever pain you have physically, when you're in pain, that's getting to the survival need level, because now you're focusing on, how do I fix this problem? I can't focus on my emails, or I can't focus on that phone call, or whatever I've got to focus on until I take care of this pain. Now, you're not walking around going, I need to do that. Your focus is on this incredible pain. So survival level, for example, is where you're in some kind of pain, not knowing where the next meal's coming from or the next glass of water's coming from. I mean, that's the extreme, of course, but on an everyday level, I was just listening to a fellow talker the other day about chronic back pain and how that negatively impacts the ability for someone to think, because so much of their focusing energy is taken on managing that pain. Yeah. So that's at the level of survival. So that is psychological survival, because you're trying to navigate this thing. And so there's that. And also the emotional fitness work is all influenced by humanistic psychology, because the emotional fitness work focuses on transforming our relationship with uncertainty. And by learning how to do that in a very pragmatic, everyday kind of level is what makes humanistic psychology so immediately implementable, replicable. And it's not necessarily based on data and research as much. Like positive psychology, for example, is based on a lot of research and data, which is important. Absolutely. The humanistic psychology has got that intuitive flavor about it, which I love.
Mm. And so to go back to that word intuitive, and you gave the example of someone who has been trying to follow their intuition, but consistently found that it's failed them in some way. What we're touching on here is basically how do you describe it? It's like it's a book of knowledge, or a field of knowledge, of wisdom, that you can actually study and get better at. So why would you encourage someone to invest their time and attention and resources into learning more about this stuff?
Because if you can learn how to build more hallways to access your unconscious mind, you get to know yourself so much more deeply. I'm gonna stuff up this quote, but Carl Jung was once known to have said that, whatever remains in your unconscious that you're not aware of, influences where you're going, and then the ego will just label it as fate. Oh, that's because it's fate. It's like, well, no, we have that's a sloppy quote. That's not actually his quote. But, but so fundamentally, Carl Jung spoke about, look, the goal really here is to make the unconscious conscious. And that's also another sort of rabbit hole. But where if someone's intuition has been not working for them in the way that they want it to work, it's because they haven't found the right avenues or accesses into their unconscious mind, which has all the answers.
Wow. This is actually very profound, isn't it? So the way that we make decisions with intuition is actually dependent on the pedigree of the stored capital in our unconscious.
Yeah.
And that is a pool of wealth that can be managed.
Yes.
Even though it's unconscious.
Yes. And if we can translate this in another level of practical sort of approach, intuition is what led me into Bitcoin. So
yeah, well, let's ask that question. Awesome.
Yeah, so when I was just reversing back, when I was in real estate, I was in real estate for 7 years, but 5 of those years were phenomenal, and the last 2 were quite tedious and disengaging. But during those last 2 years, I had a break. I had a sabbatical that went for about 15 months. And I was fortunate enough to meet this lovely couple that were running a business delivering a diploma of a teacher training and diploma in meditation. And I didn't go there to do their course. I went to speak with them because a very good friend of ours had done one of their residential retreat weekends and was just glowing. And I was in the doldrums for so long with my work that when I heard this friend talk about her experiences of this residential weekend, it sparked something in me for the first time in a long time. And I was excited by the spark. I thought, oh my God, there's something here.
Follow that.
And
yeah.
So I got the details of the owners of that particular business and I called them to ask them for a job. And as it turns out, they didn't have any jobs. And then I remember this defining moment because I said to them, it just sort of came out without me thinking. I said to them, I'm happy to come and work for you for nothing, And after a series of meetings, they took me on board. And as a result of that, they said to me I could do all of their program for free whilst I was working for them for free. So I ended up doing these 7-day silent retreats and vision quests and a whole host of mind-altering in a natural way. There was no drugs involved or medication or anything like that. It was all very much organic. And I loved it. It was 15 months of bliss. And then I ran out of money and I had to go back to my old job. And then the story goes on that I ended up starting my business. But the reason why I bring that up is because many years later, so that would have been 2003, it would have been around the second cycle that Bitcoin was going through. It would have been 16, 17, something like that. I remember seeing posts on Facebook with this particular couple where they were traveling around the world on holiday, just enjoying themselves. These guys at that stage were in their late 60s, early 70s. They're now in their 80s. And they were traveling the world. And I remember, I won't say their names because I haven't got their permission, but
no, there's no need to either.
Sure. And I remember one of them making a comment on the Facebook page about how Bitcoin had financed this holiday. And then I saw them doing multiple holidays, and this kept going right through until 2020 and COVID. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. I was so happy for them. I was so thrilled. And I never thought of anything of Bitcoin. It didn't even strike me as something to look into. I mean, how crazy is that? So it didn't. And then what happened?
Hello,
Yeah,
permanent holiday.
yeah, it's incredible. And then in 2020, because they got in pretty early, they got in when it was like $1,500 US or something.
Wow.
But so then what happened was I was listening to a fellow on YouTube who started talking about Bitcoin, and he was interviewing a Bitcoin expert. Can't remember their names, and it sounded fascinating. And then it hit me. It's like, oh my God, that couple that I worked with for so long, this was what they did. This is the pathway. And these guys, to me, the two people I worked with were one of the most high-class, deepest spiritual mentors, life mentors I've ever had in my life. So I trust them. I trust them with my sons. I trust them with anything precious to me. So I reached out and I said, hey, listen, I'm listening to this fellow, and they knew who the guy was. I said, I'm listening to this fellow on YouTube, and they're talking about, it was a course that they were selling in learning about crypto and Bitcoin. And I know that Bitcoin's not crypto. Well, it is and it isn't. But that's a whole nother conversation too. But I said, should I go down this path? And she said, she encouraged me. She said, yeah, absolutely. We've been down that path. That's how we got educated in Bitcoin. And we, as you know, we bought Bitcoin many, many years ago, and it's looked after us really, really well. And I thought, oh my God. So without knowing what I was getting into, intuitively, because I had spent so much quality time with these beautiful people who I trusted implicitly, it was based on their gentle encouragement that I invested my first $1,000 or whatever it was. It might have been a couple of grand, and I just started getting into that was the beginning of me being introduced to the rabbit hole of the Bitcoin space. They were into Ethereum and other things as well, but they were heavily balanced into Bitcoin. And so I remember once I got into it, I was then, exposed to other teachers in the Bitcoin space who were saying things like, they were professional investors, very intelligent people, saying things like, this is very early days of 2020. You shouldn't invest in anything unless you know what it's all about. You should educate yourself before you put your money into anything that you're putting money into. And I thought to myself, I know nothing about Bitcoin. I've just gone into it because of my intuition, because of these people that I've seen the evidence that clearly it's a great investment. And I didn't even know what crypto was. I didn't know what it meant. And that was the beginning. So I got in with my bit of money first. And because I had skin in the game, I got drawn into learning more about it. And it's been one heck of a journey now. Now here we are in 2025.
Well, Joe, what I love about that story is, whilst it's true that you should study, what are you going to buy? When are you going to buy? These are the two fundamental initial questions any investor has to ask. But ask someone how the Federal Reserve works.
Exactly.
Good point. Know,
how does electricity work?
How does your mobile phone work? How does your car work? That you still own one and you still use it. And so it's in some ways it's a very, very, very important point. It's do your own research. And I take from that kind of idea, it's you're responsible, no one else, versus, someone told me to do it. And it's that differentiation between self-accountability or not that's the most important lesson there, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
But I love what you just explained, is that investing is not just about numbers. It's about something so much more than that. And you have accessed your subconscious. Oh, this is making my hairs on my neck go up. Whew. The experience you'd had 10 years before, in which you didn't even ask to be paid to work, zero financial return, 15 years later is paying you in spades.
Yeah. It's I never thought of it like that. I've never thought of it like that. That's
okay.
Right.
And so just riff with me, where does that take your mind next? Essentially what I'm interested in is decision making. So this is psychology, absolutely. And so how do you trust your intuition now?
Yeah, great.
Or maybe a better question is, what's your relationship like with your intuition now?
My relationship with my intuition is the best it's ever been. There's no doubt
Brilliant.
about it.
Brilliant. And I can feel that. The way you say it, you're oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So since getting in 2020, I've just been dollar cost averaging forever, like consistently. And so I've experienced 2 cycles where the biggest experience I had was when it dropped from $85,000 Australian down to $27,000 Australian. And the people I was following were talking about how the weak hands, and I thought, what's a weak hand? Oh, that's a retail investor who's not really committed. That's my definition of it. They're just emotionally reactive to, oh my God, it's 27,000. It was 85. Oh my God, maybe I should listen to the person down the road who knows the inside of a donut about Bitcoin. Yes, let's listen to them because they know. It's like, how intuition blends into this is intuition is internal. So you can't. A mentor of mine said to me a long time ago, when it comes to listening to people out there are 2 simple questions you need to ask. Who are you and what have you done? So my friend who's into real estate, who's done really well in real estate, he's got many properties, told me I was crazy, be careful, it's dangerous, it's this, it's that. And I thought to myself, that doesn't seem to be my experience, because the people that I know who are dedicated and committed to the Bitcoin space are not those kind of people. They're people of similar like mind. They're people of solid character, smart, long-term thinkers. They've got adult levels of psychology. So I learned a long time ago what those 2 simple questions can save you a lot of pain, Jake, like to a lot of the listeners here. Because quite often when someone gives me advice, the question I ask is, what results do you have in this area? For example, Jake, if you ask me let's just pretend, like I've been married for 28 years to the one woman and I'm very happy. But let's pretend I've been married 5 times and you came to me and asked me for marriage advice. I don't think that's wise that you come to me for marriage if I've been married 5 times and I still can't hold a relationship together.
Or it depends what my intended preferred outcome is.
Yeah, true.
If I was coming to you, it's like, how do I get divorced? Like,
yeah,
okay, I'll tell you.
True. That's true. But if I want a long-term relationship, that
yes, absolutely, yeah,
yeah. So and then where the intuition kicks in is like, another example is when you and I met 2 years ago. I'll say 2 years ago, and you provided me with the next level of commitment and courage to then go to my self-managed super fund, which I had moved a little bit of my self-managed super fund back in 2022 into Bitcoin. And then we went into the down cycle and it's like, okay, well, so be it. And I just saw it through. But when I spoke with you and seeing your commitment to Bitcoin and your education around it and your knowledge around it, and also the way that we connect as human beings, you and I, that was another one of those intuitive hits to me that's like, put the rest in. So it's like you got all and not that this is gambling, but the metaphor is, it's like, I'm putting all my chips on the table for this one. And I did. And that was like a macro amplified version of my commitment to Bitcoin. That is an amplified version of the commitment I made in 2020 when I listened to my other mentors. So to me, the question is always, who are you and what have you done? So when you shared with me your personal, and I'm not going to go into it here, but when you shared with me how committed you are.
You can, Joe. It's okay.
I can. Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. I was so inspired by, we sold our house and we put it all into Bitcoin. I know a person here in Noosa who's done the same, but I didn't know about them until you're the first person I met who has done that. And I thought, here's a smart guy with responsibilities, a family, a real life, and he sold his house and put it all into Bitcoin. That backs every single word that you've said to me. And that's when I made the move. And it took me a month, as you know, to move the money. That's a whole other story. But I moved it. And just, it's amazing how the universe rewards courage. It really is. You've just given the example of a 15-year version of it. The courage to go and work for people for nothing for 15 months and then 15 years later, just getting incredible return.
Well, it's a seemingly unrelated event that has a payback that you couldn't conceive at the time.
Yes.
But somehow it magically all mixes together. And you go,
incredible.
What the hell is going on?
Incredible. And the timing was just sheer luck. Like I moved all the pieces in. It took me a month. As I'm transferring money from the self-managed super fund into my Bitcoin, into my ledger, I can only, because of different things and also my limited education, I can only move, sort of 50 grand at a time. So it took me ages. And then in the meantime, the ETFs, there was all this rumble about this ETF. It looks like
it was literally this time last year, wasn't
it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, it looks like they're going to approve it. And I'm thinking, oh my God, the price is going to run away whilst I'm moving volume into this
FOMO,
thing.
baby.
Yeah. It's different when you're just putting money in, but when you're moving volume and you're going, it's going to run away from me while I'm doing all this volume. It's like, but it didn't. It stayed in Australian dollar term. It was 60. It was floating between 60 and 65 grand. And then when the thing got approved, all the money was in. I thought, okay. And then I remember you and I talking. 6 weeks later, it was 95,000. And I was like,
it starts pumping.
Oh my God. And the ego, like I'm over myself. Like 20 years ago, I would have said to you, how good am I? Whereas now it's like, I know it's just sheer dumb fucking luck. So, take advantage of it, enjoy it.
But Joe, just to push back there, I don't think it's dumb luck at all, because you've already explained, right? You drew on your subconscious 4 or 5 years ago now, and you developed a relationship previously in your life that you were so trusting of that you were able to leverage their due diligence and life experience.
Yes.
That's good investing. Because it's not, I talk about this a bit, like you go through school, at least when I was at school, don't copy someone's report or don't copy someone's essay. You're all in chairs in long lines. You've got to write all this stuff down. It's basically just a big memory game.
Yeah, that's right.
Investing's not that. Investing is like, hang on, what are you writing? What are you writing? Okay. And like you say, who are you? What have you done? It's you need to see evidence. And that great phrase, ask a man what he owns, not what he thinks. Because that's a better reflection on what they actually think than you could talk for days.
Yes.
So I don't think it is just luck. It's actually been a period of time where you've actually thought about it quite a lot, 2016 or so, and just didn't really click. And then 2020, you've got some skin in the game, that great phrase. And then 4 years later, you go, whew, I'm actually ready to do this now. And had you not done all those things before, then you wouldn't have been close to it.
True. Yeah.
And what a time though, Joe. So great timing. And so your investment from a financial perspective is up by double, essentially, if not a bit more. For those listening, a self-managed super fund is an Australian-specific legal vehicle for retirement. So here there is the super industry, which is like the UK pensions, for example, and you can actually self-custody Bitcoin in your own self-managed super fund, which is an extraordinary superpower that many Aussies don't even realize. And so any Aussies out there listening to this that haven't thought about putting Bitcoin in their super, well, you can absolutely do it. And for a lot of people, that's the largest pool of capital that they have.
Yes.
And therefore, Joe's a great example of someone who's actually done this, a lifetime's worth of work that you've been slowly accruing into your fund over time that actually is your money. Just the government forces your employer to pay it. Now, it's probably slightly different when you run your own business. I don't know how that works. Maybe you can teach us briefly. When you work for yourself in Australia with your own business, that business has to contribute to your super.
Yeah, so the structure of my business is there's salaries. So with the salary that I get paid, my wife gets paid in Australia at the moment, I might be a little bit off with my numbers, but it's approximately 12% of your gross salary goes, so above and beyond your salary, 12% of it goes into a super fund, whether you trust a super industry fund or whether you, but in business, and I believe now it's changed, even as an employee, you can actually have your own self-managed super fund. Forgive me if that's inaccurate, but I know that having your own business, definitely 100%.
As an employee, anyone can self-manage their super.
Right. So
I've been doing it since I emigrated to Australia 5 years ago. I've had one job during that time with an employment contract in place, and I set it up for that.
Yes.
So yes, absolutely, anyone can do it. And
the benefit of it is that any balances, it depends on your balance, but if you have balances under 1.9 million, these Australian dollars, you only pay 15% tax on the money going in. So it's before tax money going into the fund, and the government will only take 15% rather than whatever your usual tax bracket is. So a self-managed super fund is extremely beneficial if you're earning well over, $80,000 to $100,000 a year kind of thing. So for us, it was a no-brainer. And then as of the time of this recording, my wife and I are both 54. At the age of 60, we'll get access to that if I should retire. I might retire for 5 days and maybe sell some and then go back to work. But there's all of these. I'm looking forward to actually learning all of the different rules come 5 years' time in terms of how to access it in a very efficient way. But essentially, that's what it is. And what I love about it is that I've also got some Bitcoin, a fair bit of it sitting outside of the super fund as well, because I wanted that flexibility. And I adore that, because if you've got your money like I had in a index fund, which pre-Bitcoin, existence to me made a lot of sense. The problem is all of the money has to be with the index fund, because if I take a little bit away, it just massively implodes the power of compound interest. Whereas that's not a problem with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is everywhere. So I can have a bit of Bitcoin here in this account, and the rest of it in my super account. And compound interest, there's no such thing. It's just a different game. So I love that. But yeah, so that was the main motivator. And now there's a rumor, as of the time of this recording, it's not official, but they're talking, the Australian government, from July 1, 2025, where there's and I don't have all the political and financial language around this. I'm not an expert in this field at all. I'm a human behavioralist, so I'm speaking just from what I know. The federal government is keen to introduce a new law in the super area where any unrealised gains with balances in excess of $3 million, you will get taxed on unrealised gains.
Wow.
which is and at this stage that's not law yet. So, and I was talking to my wife about this, because it's 2025, right? In 2030, when we get access, who knows what Bitcoin will be worth, right? And who knows what our balance will be. Then it's like I said to Sylv, what I like about this is that we can stop putting money in the super fund if that's going to be a tax cost, and move money into Bitcoin outside of the super fund. So it doesn't come under the umbrella. So, and that's again what I love about this, is because most of us in the past had put money in a super fund that works on compound interest. And as I said, if you look at the compound interest magic, if you start taking money out of that stream of investment, it massively impacts the compounded balance in 10 years' time. But with Bitcoin, that doesn't come into the conversation, and I love that. So, but I'm still dollar cost averaging religiously every Tuesday. I do it manually because I enjoy doing it. I had it on auto, but I actually love going into the exchange and just buying my little bit every week.
Nice.
I love it, and every time that balance gets to about $10,000, I take it off the exchange and then cold store it. So store it in a cold wallet.
Nice. And that's very important to anyone out there that's new to this, is getting your Bitcoin off the exchange and into your own custody. It's one of the genuine superpowers of Bitcoin as well, is the reduction in counterparty risk that your money suddenly has. It's like you control it. It can't be debased on the back end. As long as you manage your self-custody correctly, then, if you died tomorrow, someone will be able to get it, etc. And this is a genuine 10x on any wealth tool in the past, in my opinion.
Yes, and the other thing I want to add to that, Jake, is that I've been with my accountant and bookkeeper for, I was with him when I was in real estate, so over 20 years. And they're great and I love them, they're phenomenal. When I did the Bitcoin self-managed super fund, initially started adding to it back in 2022, they couldn't help me. So I had to then go and find a specialist. And I found a specialist. They're accountants. They are online only, and all they deal with is, they call it crypto, but it's Bitcoin, gold, and silver. And I thought, wow. So I had a chat with them I did a Zoom call with them, and I thought, this is all they do. And I thought, and they're Bitcoiners themselves. And I thought, okay, so my business is with my 20 years standing with my accountant, people who I adore. I felt like I was betraying them when I had to go and do this other part of my accounting with somebody else. But I just wanted to highlight that to your listeners, because sometimes what will happen is there's a saying in life that dogs bark at things they don't understand. So if you go to your accountant and suddenly say to them, and they're not Bitcoiners and they don't know anything about it, you start saying, listen, I want to start putting money in Bitcoin, you're going to be putting up with some noise that's going to be really annoying. So you need to make sure, like anything in life, that you find the right person with the right philosophy, the right belief system that is in tune with Bitcoin. So you're not going to waste any energy and time and create this doubt in you with someone starting to say silly things about it when they don't know anything about it. Remember, who are you and what have you done?
I was just going to say that back to you.
Yeah. So I've got 2 accountants now, of which one is someone who I don't actually deal with in person. Everything's done online, and they just send me messages every quarter for what they need from me as far as my Bitcoin collection is concerned in my SMSF, and then everything outside of that, my traditional accountant does in his traditional ways.
It's about having different people for different things.
Yeah,
Joe, I'd like to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which was around money and motivation.
Yeah, sure.
And this was at the very start. You were talking about your experience when you were working at Ford as a young guy. And you said that basically when you work for money, it doesn't motivate you. Or maybe I butchered that philosophy. But I'd love to understand how you feel about that as a learning from early in your life. And now, like, what is Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is money. Okay, well, what is money? Well, then you have to go down this whole rabbit hole of okay, well, we've got this history of using something to solve the double coincidence of wants problem and trade and gold and all of those important questions. So how do you see Bitcoin in relation to motivation and money?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me clarify exactly what I
please
was wanting, my intention behind what I said. So I'm still motivated by money big time, but it doesn't sit in a silo. It's in connection to other things. I'll talk about that in a sec. Going back to my old job at Ford Motor Company, what I meant by that comment was that the only thing that was keeping me there was the money, because there was no values match, there was no character match, there was no cultural match. It was the place I was dealing with were basically filled with people with just evil agendas that was self-absorbed, and I could not connect with anyone there. Well, when I say anyone, most of the people I worked with. So the only string that kept me there was the fact that back in 1994, being on 48 grand a year was like big money, and that was exciting. But what I found was after 2 years, where that was the only thing, the only little linchpin kept me there, it wasn't enough, and I had to leave. Whereas now, here we are all these years later, money still matters, money's still important, because I know that money gives us the greatest gift, which is the gift of peace, the gift of peace of mind. And that's why that's part of it. But making money in a meaningful way is very different to making money for the sake of it. So making money in a meaningful way means that you're adding value to someone's life or to someone's community or to a marketplace, where then you get paid in return as a reward for that value that you bring. So there's that there. And what's interesting about what you just said, because we could look at Bitcoin and say, well, hold on, what value are you bringing to Bitcoin? You're just buying it. But hold on, let's zoom out and go big picture, because I love what you said before, Jake, is that I gave great value to that other business for free for 15 months all those years ago. And it was because of that value that I get rewarded many, many, many years later with this education and knowledge and awareness of this thing called Bitcoin. So the universe has uncanny ways of just following law. And where there's value given, there's life given back to you. It's like right behind the screen, you can't see it, but behind the screen, as I look out here, is our front acre of our property, which is a lovely koala habitat. It's a beautiful forest. It's just gorgeous. And if you go to any of those leaves on any of those trees and you take a leaf off and you drill down, not drill down, but with a microscope, you look into that leaf and you see there's all these cellular communities. Well, the only reason why any cell that's thriving and surviving in that cellular community is because it's contributing to its cellular community. The moment that it's not contributing, nature annihilates it. It just has no space for it. So the only reason why anything exists is because of its contribution to humanity, or in the case of a cell, its contribution to its local cellular network for that leaf to be alive, so it can then live off that stem, which then puts energy into the tree. It goes on from there. So on a macro level, everything is contributing value to everything else. And so if you're motivated, singular motivation is purely money and nothing else, that defies the law of value given, value received, which is simplifying it, but it's accurate. But when I was at Ford, the motivation was purely it was survival and self-focused, and I'm getting this check and I love it, but I hate it. I hate this place. And that energy, that exchange lasted 2 years.
Wow.
And I'm amazed it even lasted 2 years. Like, it should have only lasted 6 months. But back then I was a different person, being 24-year-old, very ignorant, hadn't lived life yet, all that sort of stuff. So I was listening to a fellow the other day who was talking about Bitcoin's contribution to human consciousness. I thought, gee, that's a bit of an interesting sort of link. And it really reverberated deeply with me, because, and I'll speak from my sort of angle, which is the human behavioral angle. It's like, we say the most basic cornerstone of human behavior is the difference between a psychological adult and a psychological child is that a psychological adult takes responsibility for everything in their lives. They don't take responsibility for other people's actions. They take responsibility for everything in their lives. They don't waste any time or minimal time outsourcing their power to the excuses of the world. Or the reason why I'm this is because of the government, or because of my wife, or because of my father, or because the responsible adult doesn't think like that. And what I love about, and money amplifies all of our experiences, it really does. And what I love about Bitcoin is that it's contributing, and forcing is not the right word, but it does. It forces you to take responsibility for something that's really important in your life. So really, there's only 3 things in life that matter: our health, that's obvious; our relationships, and money. If these are the 3 big pillars, and as adults, we need to take responsibility for all of these things. We need to take responsibility for our own health. Get educated. This is all paralleling to Bitcoin. Get educated. Learn about how your system works. Learn how Bitcoin works. Get educated. Get educated in your body type and all that sort of stuff, and fuel it and give it the nutrition that works for that particular body, which is yours. Relationships. Taking time to invest in education and knowledge, in understanding the dynamic of relationship, especially you and I are both married to women. So it's understanding the dynamism that exists between man and woman, and between men and friendships, and understanding the dynamics of relationships. I've spent heaps of money and time on understanding and learning about relationships and living them out. And then the third thing is money. So Bitcoin forces us, for those of us who enter Bitcoin, it forces us to certainly go to a certain level of our education, because we have to take responsibility for ownership, especially when you're here. I had a friend who used to live in California who lost $10,000 US of Bitcoin because he left it on some exchange and didn't know about this cold storage. He didn't take full responsibility for his own education. So I love that. That's one thing, one of the many things that Bitcoin contributes to the human psyche, is to grow the F up and stop relying on whatever's going on out there to look after you. Get off the teat and start, living your own life. And that's how I see Bitcoin. It focuses us to grow up and take responsibility, which is scary, especially when the balance gets big. You go, gee, am I doing the right thing? Hence the conversation we had a few months ago. And then the other contribution to humanity is, to me, it's almost like a paralleling universe to how the ether itself works. Like, Bitcoin is everywhere. It's invisible. It's like oxygen. It's invisible, whether you believe in it, whether you don't. It exists. It will always exist. Try opting out of oxygen. It's not going to work for you. And I think financially, opting in to Bitcoin is like opting into oxygen with conscious awareness. It's like, I'm aware of this thing called oxygen now, even though it's been there the whole time. It's like
Wow.
the fish. It's like the fish waking up to, oh my God, I've been in water all my life.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. And to me, Bitcoin is the beginning of a new ether, a new water, a new awareness.
There's an excellent article. Shout out to Macro Jack, who came on my previous podcast, Bitcoin with Jake. But there's a good story called The Allegory of Plato's Cave, I think it is.
Oh, yes.
And,
yes. Classic story.
And he's repurposed that in relation to modern fiat currency.
Right.
And how essentially the fiat system has us underground in a cave, chained up. And the idea is that someone escapes and they walk up to the entrance to the cave and they look outside and there's, freedom, accountability, Bitcoin, and they turn back around and they go back inside because they're not ready to see this new world.
Yes.
And it happens all the time, right? People have got mortgages, people have got finance on their cars, they've got school fees to pay, they're in this high intensity game of debt driven, I owe this, I owe that, I've got to earn more, got to earn more, without realizing they're being debased on the back end. There's something up with the money. But can you go on that holiday you used to be able to go on? No, I can't afford it any longer. Can you get the same car? Can't afford it. It's like the cave's getting horribler and horribler and horribler. But when you show them another opportunity, until they're ready, they're not willing to look at it.
It's incredible, Jake. It's incredible.
Who wouldn't want oxygen when you say it like that?
Yeah.
Like, it seems like a no-brainer, but you obviously have to have a certain predisposition. Or I think an obvious reflection is actually, I think it's around 4 or 5 major life experiences that you have to have had before you realize Bitcoin's something you've got to look at more. And so you've basically had 3 or 4 big problems you had to solve. And you're suddenly like, that solves this thing. Do you know what I mean? And it all kind of comes together. Joe, I'd love one more question if that's all right.
Yeah.
Which is, so you mentioned you're a coach.
Yeah.
If someone wanted to reach out and learn more about what you do, what would you take someone through? What would you steer them towards?
Probably the best way is to go directly to joepane.com.au. Is that what you mean in terms of direction of where to go? Yeah. joepane.com.au, because there's always free resources people can download there. The emotional fitness work that I do focuses deeply into transforming your relationship with uncertainty. And uncertainty, is a precursory seed to all growth. And coming up, actually, at the end of this month, going into February, we've got 3 times a year we do a free public event on Zoom it's a 4-part series called the 2025 Uncertainty Mastery Bootcamp. If they go to joepane.com.au, it's pretty obvious where to register for that. And have a look around. There's 101 episodes of my podcast on there, and there's a whole bunch of other free resources that dives deep into this area of emotional fitness.
Nice, well done, Joe. And it really catches my attention, this idea that you can invest in other areas of your life and you can use these same kind of lenses and tools to do it. And so investing in who you are and how you think is a classic intellectual capital scenario. And as you're explaining brilliantly over the last hour, it's 100% worth doing. But it's not so obvious initially, A, how to do it, and B, what the return might be, because it might take 15 years to get paid back.
Yeah. And it's also the intention. The intention is not always for self-gain. The intention should come from a contribution realm, because look, I've learned a long time ago, the more you look after those around you, the more they look after you. You look after other people's dreams, and your dreams get taken care of along in the ride. They really do. And Bitcoin just seems to be one of those things the significant thing that is taking care of our own dreams somehow. So, it's incredible. So there's so much more I could say.
Well, Joe, this is the thing. I'm year 1, it's going to be 1 hour long conversations roughly, and I'm going to do it all online. But year 2, I'm going to start thinking about how to get some in-person conversations that are like 2, 3, 4 hours long, because I love those so much as a listener, and I'm very confident I could recreate some super high quality stuff. So anyway, that's for another time. Joe, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Jake. Thanks for having me.